When you go to a language class in school, it's always the same story. A lot of grammar rules, endless vocabulary lists, no real life conversation. It's always the same story. You end up disliking the language and not learning anything at all. These are all outdated methods of learning. The first reason is that teachers teach a grammar translation method, which means that we can't pass the exam if we don't know the grammar rules. This is not a natural way of learning a language for a person. Why? Because in our mind, we're not programmed to form sentences based on regulations, rules that we can access in our minds all the time. If you are a native English speaker, you probably haven't heard of the zero conditional or the first conditional. Or if you have, maybe you don't actually know what it is. This is because it comes to a point where language comes so naturally to us that we don't even have to learn any rules or anything to form sentences. Let's look at how children learn. First of all, through trial and error. Children often make mistakes when talking, and their parents, their family, or their teachers correct them. Second of all, through listening and exposure. They learn from listening to their parents, listening to other people speak, watching shows, and they identify these patterns in their mind that it's not necessary for them to study on a notebook or anything. Another way they learn is through context. Children learn through context that is important for them. For example, talking to their parents about what they're gonna eat for dinner, talking to their friends. They also learn through play. This means that they create new words, and this is what I do with my friends sometimes. For example, I will have the word pollo and bocata, and I form bollata. We make these funny words. If a kid did it, then he would learn a language much faster. We can see that this way of learning a language is more instinctive, natural, contextual, and this builds connections in our brain that makes it easier to learn a language. Let's compare this to academic learning. First of all, we see learning that is learned by motivation to pass an exam, to pass the subject, as opposed to learning because of need, because you need it to survive, to ask for things. This is why the best method is actually to go to the country and work for a while, live for a few weeks, for a few months, if you can afford it. Another way language is taught is through scripted dialogues. These dialogues aren't meaningful to you, and so you won't learn them as easily. It's not the same having a dialogue with your parents about what you're going to do this weekend, where you're going to go, and who you are going to bring, as opposed to a scripted dialogue between Billy and Sarah about their plans for the weekend campfire. Another important point is that learning a language in school can feel forced because it's not intuitive like children learn. You are taught to analyze sentences. This makes it very mechanical and unnatural way of learning. Mistakes are also discouraged in school learning because you are afraid of failing the exam. Learning a language in school also follows a strict curriculum, which means that you will be discouraged from making mistakes, which, as we saw, is how children learn. When they are corrected, your brain automatically feels that pattern and will not make that mistake again. Or if it will, then sometimes it will auto-correct itself because of the feedback. Because in language learning, you're afraid of failing the exam and the consequences that will have with your parents getting angry at you, failing in your career. This pressure will inhibit language learning. Before jumping into the solutions I propose, let's talk about the last mistake that school learning makes. And this is having no cultural insights. Learning a language without learning about the culture is like reading a book with half the pages missing. you're missing the full picture. If you learn about the culture, you will integrate much better into the country you will want to live in. This will avoid also misunderstandings, and you will show more respect for the people in this culture. Now let's talk about Stephen Krashen, a famous linguist who invented a theory for learning a language in the best possible way. First of all, the acquisition learning hypothesis. Stephen Krashen makes a difference between acquiring a language and learning a language. Acquiring a language is how children learn a language, through intuitive learning and contextual understanding, whereas learning a language is learning grammar rules, vocabulary lists, and sentence structure. Krashen argues that acquiring a language is more important than learning it. Second of all, the input hypothesis. He argues that learning a language is easier when we are exposed to constant input that is meaningful to us. He argues that fluency is achieved when you are exposed to input that is slightly beyond your level. He expresses this as I plus 1, where I in the equation is your current level. This is more important to him than learning grammar rules. Next is the monitor hypothesis. He says that learning grammar rules helps because the brain acts as a monitor to correct sentences and sentence structure. The usefulness of this is, however, limited because it needs time, focus, and knowledge, which is not practical for everyday conversation. Maybe for texting or a formal text, where you have more time to think. Our brains also don't learn the grammar the order it is taught at school. This is called the natural order hypothesis. And what it means basically is that our brains learn these structures when they are repeated constantly. For example, I'm watching a show in English and they are talking about a past experience and they use did, was doing, or was. My brain automatically picks up that this is a past experience that happened before. I will now be able to use the past without a problem. And finally, let's talk about the affective filter hypothesis. When our brain is exposed to anxiety, stress, and an environment of perfectionism in language learning, then this can block our mental capacity to learn the language. It's better to create a stress-free, relaxed environment for learning a language. Here's what we have learned in this video. Acquisition is unconscious and happens when learners are exposed to meaningful input that they can mostly understand. Formal learning, grammar, vocabulary drills, and plays a minimal role in fluency. Learners acquire best a language when they are exposed to I plus 1 input, which is just beyond their current learning level. Emotional and motivational factors play a crucial role in learning a language, as this so-called affective filter can block input. Thanks for watching. Make sure to give it a like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this in the future. Also, follow us on TikTok. We post a lot of advice there that we don't post on YouTube.